Welcome to this crash course on using the Gmail API with Python. In this course, we'll explore how to leverage the power of the Gmail API to automate email-related tasks using Python. The Gmail API is a powerful tool provided by Google that allows developers to interact with Gmail accounts programmatically. It offers a wide range of functionalities, from reading and sending emails to managing labels and handling attachments. In terms of the use cases, with Gmail API, you can build sophisticated email automation systems for tasks like sorting messages and sending automated replies, extract comprehensive data for in-depth communication analysis, develop fully customized email clients tailored to specific organizational needs, and seamlessly integrate robust email functionality into a wide variety of applications and services. For the agenda, we will start out by set up the Python environment. This includes creating a virtual environment and installing the necessary libraries to work with the Gmail API. Next, we'll set up the Google Cloud Console. This involves setting up a new project and enabling the Gmail API for your project. Finally, we'll explore different Gmail API examples to perform various tasks, such as reading emails, sending emails, and managing labels, download email attachments, and a few others. Since this is a crash course, I'll be moving at a pretty fast pace. If you have any questions related to using Gmail API, you can ask your question in the comments below. Now, let's start with setting up your Python environment. Virtual environments are isolated Python environments that allow you to manage dependencies for different projects separately. To create a virtual environment, open your terminal or command prompt and navigate to your project directory. Then run the command python-env followed by the virtual environment name. cd into the virtual environment directory and activate the environment. Next, we need to install the necessary Python dependencies. On your terminal, run the command pip install Google API Python client, Google auth httplib2, and Google auth OAuth-lib. Now that your Python environment is set up, let's move on to setting up your Google Cloud environment. Navigate to console.cloud.google.com. If you don't have a Google Cloud account, simply sign up for an account. It is completely free. Gmail API is also free with unlimited usage. Once you're logged into the Google Cloud Console, you'll need to create a Google Cloud project. Click on the project dropdown near the top of the page. Then click New Project, give your project a name, and click Create. After your project is created, you need to enable the Gmail API. Navigate to the APIs and Services dashboard. Click on Enable APIs and Services. At the top of the page, search for Gmail API and enable the Gmail API service. Now that we've enabled the Gmail API, we need to set up the OAuth consent screen. This is a crucial step that allows your application to request permission to access user data. In the Google Cloud Console, under APIs and Services, click OAuth consent screen. Select External as the user type and click Create. Fill in the app name field with a name for your application and fill out the email for the user support email and developer contact information. Click Save and Continue. Skip the scope step as we will provide the permission scopes directly in the script. On the Test Users page, click Add Users and add the user's email address. Click Save and Continue. Review your settings and click back to Dashboard. The final step is creating an OAuth 2 credential. Under APIs and Services, click Credentials. click Create Credentials at the top of the page and select Auth Client ID. For the application type, choose Desktop App. Give your OAuth client a name, then click Create. You'll be presented with your client ID and client secret. Download the JSON file containing these credentials. Save it in your project directory and name the file client-secret.json. You'll use this file to authenticate your application. Now that we have finished setting up the Python and Google Cloud environments, let's dive into the Gmail API examples to automate your Gmail tasks. To simplify connecting to Google APIs, create a Python file called googleapi.py. This module will contain a function to construct Google API service instances for services like Google Sheets, Gmail, YouTube, and others. In the script, import the necessary libraries showing on the screen. Next, create a function called createService with 4 parameters: client secret file, API name, API version, scopes, and prefix. This function is the core of our module and will handle the creation of service objects for different Google APIs. The client secret file parameter takes the path to the client secret file, which contains the credentials for your Google application. The API name parameter specifies which Google API you want to use, such as Gmail or Sheets. The API version parameter is the API version you want to use, and the scopes parameter defines the level of access your application needs. Inside the function, create the constant variables to define the client secret file path, API name, API version, and permission scopes. Then construct the file path for storing the authentication token file. A token file is a locally stored file containing authentication credentials to refresh access token. To implement the authentication logic, first, check if a token directory exists and create it if it doesn't. This directory will store the authentication information. Then attempt to load existing credentials from the token file. If the file exists, read the credentials from it. Next, add the credential validation and refresh logic. If the credentials are not valid or don't exist, either refresh them or create a new one through the OAuth2 flow. Finally, use the build function to construct the API client instance and return the service object. Let's test the createService function and ensure that we have set up everything correctly in the Google APIs module. Create a new Python file. In the file, import the createService function from the Google APIs module. Then create the variables to define the client secret file path, API service name, API version, and the permission scope to connect to Gmail API endpoint. Run the createService function to construct the Gmail API client as service. When you create the Gmail API client instance for the first time, a browser window will open, prompting you to log into your Google account and grant permission for the application to access your Gmail data. After granting permission, the authentication token will be saved locally, allowing you to use the API without repeating this process in future runs. If I print the members of the Gmail service object, you should see the user's resource is now available for the Gmail API. Now that we have created the function to construct Gmail API client instance, let's move on to the Gmail API examples. For this Gmail API crash course, I will share 10 examples, which I believe will cover 90% of the use cases. We'll start by learning how to send an email with attachments, then move on to fetching emails, downloading attachments, and searching emails. We'll also cover more advanced topics like managing labels, deleting emails, handling drafts, and working with email conversations. By the end of this course, you'll have all the tools you need to automate various Gmail tasks using the API. Now let's dive into the examples. For this example, we will learn how to fetch emails. Create a Python file called gmailapi.py. This module will contain the functions to interact with the Gmail API. Inside the module, import the libraries showing on the screen. The email mime module is used for creating and manipulating email messages in Python. It provides classes for handling different parts of an email, such as the body, attachments, and headers. This module will be essential for constructing our email messages when using the Gmail API. Next, let's create a function called initGmail service to simplify the Gmail service instance creation by predefining the API name, API version, and scopes in the parameters. In the function, we will pass the arguments to the createService function to construct the Gmail API client. Gmail API is probably one of the most complex and difficult Google API, just because you have so many different components, formats, and protocols that you have to deal with. I've already created functions to mitigate these hassles, so you don't have to deal with them directly. Create a private function called extractBody with a parameter called payload. This will be the helper function to extract the body from an email payload. A payload is a data structure in email messages that contains the actual content of the email, including the body text, headers, and any attachments. Inside the function, set the default body message if no text body is found. Next, check if parts or body is presented in the payload argument. When Gmail API returns an email message response, depending on the email format, the body may be structured differently. For multi-part emails, the body may be nested within parts of the payload. In this case, searches for a multi-part alternative section, which often contains both plain text and HTML versions of the email. Otherwise, check for plain text only. Some email content, including certain attachments or message parts, may be base 64 encoded. When dealing with such encoded content from Gmail or other email providers, we may need to decode it using a base 64 decoding method to return the body or attachment content. To fetch emails from Gmail API, create a function called getEmailMessages with parameters, service, user ID, label IDs, folder name, and max results. The user ID me represents the owner's account. Inside the function, start by initializing an empty list called messages to store the retrieved email messages. Also, initialize a variable nextPageToken to none, which will be used for pagination. Now, to check if a folder name is provided, insert an if statement that checks if the folder name parameter is not empty. Inside the if block, get all the user's Gmail labels into a variable called label results. Then extract the labels from label results and store them in a variable called labels. Create a variable called folder label ID and use a list comprehension to find the label ID that matches the provided folder name. Make sure to use lower method for case-insensitive comparison. If a matching label is found, check if label IDs already exists. If it does, append the folder label ID to it. If not, create a new list with folder label ID as its only element. If no matching label is found, raise a value error with a message indicating that the folder wasn't found. Now insert a while loop that will continue until all messages are retrieved. Inside the loop, call the messages list method providing user ID, label IDs, max results, and next page token. The message list method can only fetch up to 500 messages per API call. That's why here we need to use the min function to ensure we don't exceed the maximum number of messages we want to retrieve. Store the result of the API call in a variable called result. After the API call, extend the messages list with the messages from the API response and update the next page token. Finally, add a condition to break the loop if there's no next page token. or if we've reached the maximum number of messages specified. After the loop, return the messages list, slicing it to the max results, if specified. This ensures we return exactly the number of messages requested, even if we retrieve more due to the batching process. To extract the details of an email message, create a function called getEmailMessageDetails with parameters, service and message ID. Inside the function, retrieve the full message using the messageGet method, providing the message ID and set format to full. From the response, extract the payload from the message and retrieve the headers. The headers contain important metadata about the email. Now, extract the relevant information from the headers. Begin with the subject. Use a list comprehension to find the header with the name subject and get its value. Use the subject from the message object or default to no subject if no subject is found. Follow the same approach to extract the remaining relevant properties. To extract the email body, use the extract body function and pass payload as the argument. Finally, return a dictionary containing all the extracted information. Save the Google API module file and create a new Python file as the main script. In the script, import the init Gmail service, get email messages, and get email message details functions. Initialize the Gmail service by calling the init Gmail service function with a client file as an argument. Here, retrieve the email messages by calling the getEmailMessages function. For demonstration, I will set the max results parameter to 5 to limit the number of messages retrieved and leave everything else as default. If I print the messages object, here, we get a list of elements containing each message's ID and its thread ID. In Gmail, a message ID is a unique identifier for individual email messages in Gmail. Each email, whether sent or received, has its own message ID. A thread ID, on the other hand, identifies a conversation thread containing one or more related messages. Gmail groups related messages into threads based on criteria like subject line and participants. Multiple messages can share the same thread ID, creating a one-to-many relationship between threads and messages. This is a pretty important concept you have to understand if you want to fetch Gmail conversation using Gmail API. To print each message's detail, insert a for loop to iterate each element in the messages list. Inside the loop, call the getEmailMessageDetails function with the message ID as arguments to extract email details. If I run the loop, the output will print the email details for the 5 messages in the messages object. And that covers everything for this example. Now let's move on to the next example to learn how to send an email with attachments. In this example, we will learn how to send an email with attachments using Gmail API. In the Gmail API module, create a function called sendEmail with parameters, service to subject body type and attachment paths. 2 subject and body parameters should be self-explanatory. The body type parameter takes the value of either plain or HTML, and the attachment paths take a list of file paths. Inside the function, begin by creating a MIME multi-part object called message for the email message. Set the to and subject fields of the message using the provided parameters. Next, validate the body type argument. If it is not plain or HTML, raise a value error. In the message object, attach the email body to the message using MIME text and specifying the body type. Handling email attachment in Gmail API is pretty painful in my opinion. To handle the attachments, first, check if attachment paths are provided. If file path is invalid, raise a file not found error with a message indicating which file was not found. Iterates through each path to process the attachments. For each attachment, first checks if the file exists. If the file is found, extracts the file name, then open the file in binary mode to read its contents. Inside the context manager, create a MIME-based object named pot. For the MIME-based object, set its type to application and subtype to octet stream. Now read the entire contents of the open file using the read method. Set this content as the payload of the pod object using the setPayload method. The next step to prepare the attachment is encode the attachment using base64, encoding with encode base64 method. Then add a header to the attachment specifying the content disposition as an attachment with the original file name. Lastly, attach the pod object to the message to finish attaching an attachment to an email message. To attach the email message, encode the entire message as a URL safe base 64 string. To send the email, use the message send method. Set the user ID to me and a dictionary containing the raw message as the body. After an email is sent, return the message response. To use the function, create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import the path to set the attachment directory and init Gmail service and send email functions from the Gmail API module. Construct the Gmail client instance using the init Gmail service function. Define the email message properties like recipient's email, subject name, email body, and attachment file path. For this example, I am going to attach a PDF file and the image file showing in my attachments directory. To send an email with attachments, call the sendEmail function and set the parameter values. Now let me run the function. From the email send response, it contains the message ID, thread ID, and the label IDs. If I refresh my Gmail inbox, I see that I now have a new email sent using Gmail API with 2 attachments. And that covers everything for this example. Now let's move on to the next example to learn how to download email attachments. From the last example, we learned how to send an email with attachments. In this example, we will learn how to download an email attachments. In the Gmail API module, create 2 functions called download attachments parent and download attachment all. The difference between the 2 functions is that the download attachments parent function will download the attachments belong to an email message, and the download attachment all function will download all the attachments in a message thread. When using the 2 functions, user will provide the user ID, message ID, and directory path to save the files. If we look at the source code of the 2 functions, basically we are using the messages get method to retrieve the attachment ID from the payload, then use the messages attachments get method to return the file's binary. To use the functions, create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import the path class to define the download directory and download attachments parent and download attachment all functions from the Gmail API module. To download an email attachments, create the variables to define the user ID, message ID, and file download directory. Then run one of the download attachments functions. If you set up everything correctly, you should see file attachments are downloaded in the target directory. And that covers everything for this example. Now let's move on to the next example to learn how to search emails. In this example, we will learn how to search emails using Gmail API. The Gmail API supports message querying using search operators to refine the search functionality. If you want to effectively manage your Gmail inbox, mastering these search operators will benefit you tremendously in the long run. To search email messages using Gmail API, in the Gmail API module, create two functions called search emails and search email conversations with parameters, service, query, user ID, and max results. If we look at the code base of the two functions, the search emails function applies the query filter to search each message individually, while the search email conversations function returns the entire conversation thread that matches the query string. And in the function, we will insert a while loop to fetch the emails until either next page token returns nothing, or the total messages condition is met. To use the function, create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import the init Gmail service, get email message details, search emails, and search email conversations functions from the Gmail API module. Construct the Gmail client using the init Gmail service function. To search emails, define the query string. In this case, I will search the first 30 emails sent by myself. Then use one of the search email functions to get the email messages. Iterate each email message and use the getEmailMessageDetails function to return the email properties. If I run the code block, it will print the email messages sent by me. And that covers everything for this example. Now let's move on to the next example to learn how to manage labels. In this example, we will learn how to manage Gmail labels using the Gmail API. Labels in Gmail are an essential organizational tool that allows users to categorize and sort their emails efficiently. In Gmail, an email can have multiple labels, making it easier to categorize messages that fit into more than one category. For this lesson, I will cover how to use Gmail API to create labels, list labels, get label detail, modify a label, and delete labels. In the Gmail API module, create a function called createLabel to create a Gmail label with parameters, service name, label list visibility, and message list visibility. The difference between label list visibility and message list visibility is that label list visibility controls the visibility of Gmail label. Meanwhile, message list visibility controls if a label is showing in an email message. In the function, create a dictionary to define the label properties. Then use the labelsCreate method to create the label, passing the user ID and the label properties dictionary as the body. Return the label object as the output. To list all labels in a Gmail account, create a function called listLabels that takes the service as a parameter. Use the labelsList method to retrieve all labels. Return the list of labels by referencing the labels key from the response and return as the output. For getting details of a specific label like how many messages or threads belong to a label, create a function called getLabelDetails that takes the service and label ID as parameters. Return the output from labelsGet method with user ID and label ID as the arguments. To modify an existing label, create a function called modifyLabel that takes the service, label ID, and any additional updates as keyword arguments. In the function, first retrieve the existing label using the labelsGet method, then update the label properties with the provided updates. Finally, use the labelsUpdate method to apply the changes and return the updated label. For deleting a label, create a function called deleteLabel that takes the service and label ID as parameters. use the labels delete method to remove the specified label. Lastly, create a helper function called map label name to ID that takes the service and the label name as parameters. This function will use the list labels function to get all labels, then find and return the ID of the label matching the given name. If no matching label is found, it returns none. We will be using this function in the next lesson on how to manage email labels. Create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import the init Gmail service, create label, list labels, modify label, delete label, get label details, and map label name to ID functions from the Gmail API module. Then initialize the Gmail API service using the init Gmail service function. To create labels in Gmail, create the list to define the main labels and the nested labels. In this case, I will create 5 labels and 3 sub-labels under the Patreon label. I will also create an empty list called created labels to store the IDs of the created labels for showing how to modify labels later. Iterate through the labels list and use the create label function to create each label. To create the sub-labels, insert an if statement to check if the current label is Patreon. If it is, construct the label string using the format main label name / sub-label name. Let me run the code block to create the labels. If I refresh my inbox, here are all the labels created using Gmail API. This will save you a lot of time if you need to create a large number of labels in Gmail. To list labels, run the list labels function to retrieve all labels and save the output as Gmail labels. If I print the Gmail labels object from the output, we get a list of records containing the label ID, label name, visibility setting, and label type. Labels with system label type are created by Gmail, in which you cannot modify or delete. If you need to access information like how total emails or unread and read emails in a label, run the getLabelDetails function and pass the Gmail service object and label ID as argument. To modify an existing label, run the modify label function. Pass the Gmail service client and property name and its value as the arguments. Refresh the Gmail inbox to see the changes. To delete Gmail labels, simply retrieve the labels. Iterate each label object and check for the label type. If label type is user, run the delete label function with label ID to delete the label. And that covers everything for this example. Now let's move on to the next example to learn how to manage email labels. From the previous lesson, we learned how to manage Gmail labels. In this lesson, we will learn how to manage email labels. In the Gmail API module, create a function called modify email labels with parameters service, user ID, message ID, add labels, and remove labels. In the function, create an inner function called batch labels to process the labels in batches. This function will take a list of labels and split them into smaller batches of a specified size. This batching approach helps to avoid potential API limitations when dealing with a large number of labels. To add labels to an email, check if add labels argument is empty first. If not, iterate the labels in batches and use the messages modify method, providing the user ID, message ID, and label IDs in the body of the request using the dictionary key add label IDs. To remove labels in an email, the setup is exactly the same as add labels, except we will iterate label IDs from the remove labels argument and use remove label IDs key in the dictionary body. Save the file and create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import the init Gmail service, search emails, modify email labels, get email message details, and map label name to ID functions from the Gmail API module. Then initialize the Gmail API service using the init Gmail service function. Define the query string and use the search emails function to retrieve the target email messages. In this example, I'll add labels to the first 5 emails I received from Patreon in my inbox. Unfortunately, we can't directly assign a label name to an email. Instead, use the map label name to ID function to obtain the label ID for the label we want to add to an email message. To add labels to the 5 email messages, iterate each message in the messages list. To get the email's subject, use the getEmailMessageDetails function to return the email's metadata. Then insert an if statement to check if sender's email matches the target email address. If yes, call the modify email labels function providing the Gmail service client, message ID, and label IDs to the add labels parameters. Once labels are added to an email, print a message with the email subject. Now let me run the code block to add labels to the emails. If I refresh my inbox, in the Patreon label, the Patreon label is added to the 5 emails. Now I'll remove the labels using the same step but using the remove labels parameter. And the Patreon label for the 5 email messages are now removed. And that covers everything for this lesson. Now let's move on to the next lesson to learn how to delete emails. In this lesson, we will learn how to delete emails using Gmail API. In the Gmail API, there are 2 distinct operations for removing emails: trash and delete. While both actions remove emails from a user's inbox, they serve different purposes and have different outcomes. The trash operation moves emails to the trash folder. The delete operation, on the other hand, is more permanent and immediate. When you use the delete operation, emails are permanently removed from the user's mailbox. In the Gmail API module, create a function called trash email with parameters user ID and message ID to move an email to the trash folder. In the function, use the message trash method, providing the user ID and message ID to move an email to the trash folder. I know some people have thousands of emails in their inbox, if not more. If you're deleting thousands of email individually, then the operation will take a while. In that case, we can delete emails in batches. Create a function called batch trash emails with service, user ID, and message IDs as the parameters. In the function, create a new batch HTTP request object to combine multiple API calls into a single HTTP request. Then iterate each message ID from and add the trash API request without the execution method to the batch object. Once all the requests are added, run the batch execute method to execute the requests in batches. To permanently delete an email, create a function called permanently delete email with the same parameters. In the function, call the message delete method with user ID and message ID to delete an email. Now, just in case you want to untrash an email or emails, create 2 functions called untrash and batch untrash emails with the same parameters as the trash email and batch trash emails functions. The source code are identical, but instead change trash to untrash in the method name. Lastly, if you want to automate the empty trash operation, create a function called empty trash. In the function, create the variables to store the next page token and track the number of emails deleted. To delete emails in the trash folder, insert a while loop and set the condition to true to make it infinite. In the loop, retrieve the target emails using the messages list method with query set to inTrash to filter the messages. Retrieve the messages and use messages delete method to permanently delete the emails in batches. Once all the emails are deleted in the trash folder and next page token returns none, exit out the loop and return the number of emails deleted. Create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import init Gmail service, search emails, get email message details, trash email, batch trash emails, untrash email, modify email labels, and empty trash functions. Then initialize the Gmail API service using the init Gmail service function. For this lesson, I will only showing how to move emails to the trash folder, as delete email and trash email functions work exactly the same way. To move emails to the trash folder, insert the routine to query the email messages. Then iterate each message and use the trash email function to move the email to the trash folder. Then run the code block to move the emails to the trash folder. If I refresh the trash folder, I see that the 5 last email messages sent by me is moved to the trash folder. To untrash the emails, it's a two-step process. First, we need to query the emails in the trash folder. Iterate each email message and use the untrash email function to untrash an email. When we use Gmail API to untrash an email, the email message will be moved to the all mail folder. The all mail folder contains every single email in your Gmail account, except those in trash or spam folders. So we need to use the modify email labels function to reattach the inbox label to the untrashed emails. If you want to trash emails in batches, create an empty list to store the emails. Then query the emails you want to delete. Iterate each email message and add the email ID to the target emails list. Once we have collected all the email message IDs, call the batch trash emails function and pass the message IDs for the email messages you want to delete. And to empty the trash folder, simply call the empty trash function and pass the Gmail client. And that covers everything for this lesson. Now let's move on to the next lesson to learn how to manage draft emails. In this lesson, we will learn how to manage draft email with Gmail API. Working with draft emails using Gmail API is relatively straightforward. The Gmail Draft API works very similar to how you would list an email, create an email, or delete an email. The only difference is the API endpoint. For this lesson, I will briefly go through the functions to manage draft emails and how to use each function. In the Gmail API module, create a function called list draft email messages to list emails in the draft folder. In the function, use a while loop to fetch draft email messages in the draft folder using the drafts list method until max message number is reached or next page token returns nothing. Then return the draft email messages. To create a draft email message, create a function called createDraftEmail to construct the message detail. The code base is the same as the sendEmail function, but instead of sending an email, use draftsCreate method to create the draft email and return the draft object. To get the draft email message details, create a function called getDraftEmailMessageDetails. The code base is identical to the getEmailMessageDetails function, but instead using the draftsGet method to get the draft email message details and return the properties as a dictionary object. To send a draft email message, create a function called sendDraftEmail with draft ID as the parameter. In the function, call the draft send method and providing the user ID and draft ID in the body. Lastly, if you want to delete a draft email, which is something I have to do pretty frequently, create a function called deleteDraftEmail with service and draft ID as the parameters. In the function, call the draftDelete method and pass the user ID and draft ID to delete a draft email message. Create a Python file as the main script. In the script, import the Python libraries showing on the screen. Then initialize the Gmail API service using the initGmailService function. To create a draft email, call the createDraftEmail function and pass Gmail service, recipient address, email subject, and email body properties to the required parameters. Body type and attachment paths are optional, but I will include them in this example. Run the code block to create the draft email. To view the draft emails, run the list draft email messages function and save the output into an object. If I print the drafts object inside the object, we get a list of records containing the draft ID, message ID, and message thread ID. And to send the draft email message, iterate each draft message record. Use the getDraftEmailMessageDetails function to get the message details, then call the sendDraftEmail function providing the Gmail service and draft ID. And lastly, to delete a draft email, call the draftDeleteEmail function providing the Gmail client and draft ID. And that covers everything for this lesson. Now let's move on to the last lesson to learn how print an email conversation. This is the last lesson for the Gmail API in Python crash course. In this lesson, we will learn how to print an entire email conversation. In the Gmail API module, create a function called getMessageAndReplies with service and message ID as the parameters. If we look at the code base, basically, we are using the messageGet method to get the message thread ID. Then using the threadsGet method, it will return each message that comprises the conversation in a list. To clean up the output, I am creating an empty list called processMessages. Then iterating each message from the thread object, extracting the subject, sender's email, date, and email body properties, and append the data as a dictionary to the process messages list is the output. To use the function, create a Python file as the main script. Import the initGmailService, getEmailMessage, and getMessageAndReplies functions from the Gmail API module. Then initialize the Gmail API service using the initGmailService function. For this example, I will print the email conversation of the last email in my inbox. Then call the getMessageAndReplies function to get the email chain. If I print the message chain object, we get a list of dictionaries containing each email properties. To make the output a little more clean, we can iterate the elements in the message chain and print each email property individually. And that concludes this Gmail API in Python crash course. I hope you find the video useful. If you have any questions related to any example I covered in the video, please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more tutorials like this.